top-tier criminal who laundered millions of pounds from the Brink robbery was named to the police as the organiser of the notorious Essex Boys murders, but they never questioned him about the killings, a team of former detective claims. Drug dealers Patrick Tate, 37, Anthony Tucker, 38, and Craig Rolfe, 26, were shot dead in a Range Rover on an isolated farm track in Retterton near Basildon and were discovered on December 7th, 1995, in what became the country's most notorious gangland assassinations and was the subject of several movies. 3 years later, Michael Steele, 77, and Jack Worms, 58, were convicted of the murders on the evidence of supergrass Darren Nichols, who claimed to be their getaway driver after his arrest over a cannabis importation in May 1996. The former murder detectives claimed to have unearthed a significant line of inquiry into a row between Tucker and other known criminals of the proceeds of an armed robbery that they say was never properly investigated, and they believe it could have led to a serious miscarriage of justice. Former Met Police DCI David McKelvey, now boss of private investigation firm TMI, is leading the review, which is focused on statements made by criminal Billy Jasper. Jasper told the police 4 months before Nichols made his statements that he was the getaway driver for a different killer and that Brink's money launderer Patsy Bolt-Eyes Clark had ordered the hit. Mr. McKelvey said they had the name of a major criminal said to be behind the murders, the gunman, a credible motive and intelligence linking Tucker to these people, and money from the robbery. They also had the account of the man claiming to be the getaway driver, but chose to dismiss what he said, even with the intelligence, because it did not fit in with their blinkered theory about Worms and Steele. Nichols told the Old Bailey the 3 victims were lured there by Worms and Steele on the pretense of a drug deal, but was instead blasted to death. The prosecution said they were shot between 6:48pm and 6:59pm the night before the bodies were found. Worms, who was released on parole after 23 years in March, and Steele have always insisted they were innocent and the real killers escaped justice. There was no forensic evidence linking them to the scene, and the prosecution relied on mobile phone cell site evidence, which was later found unreliable at a Court of Appeal hearing. TMI have spent more than a year looking through the case files for an independent review after learning of concerns about the case, and has not been contracted by the defence. The team includes former Met Police DCS Albert Patrick, who was involved in the investigations into serial killer Colin Ireland, and reviews of the murders of Rachel Nickel and Damiola Taylor, and 2 other seasoned former senior murder detectives. Mr. McKelvey described Mr. Jasper's account as compelling and fitting with intelligence available to the original investigation team, and that known to the former detectives who spent years investigating serious organised crime in London and Essex. Patsy Bolt-Eyes Clark, a former scrap dealer and nightclub owner, died aged 81 in November 2019. In 1992, he was jailed for 6 years for laundering more than 4.2 million of the proceeds of the infamous 1983 26 million gold bullion robbery at the Brink warehouse at Heathrow Airport. Jasper gave Essex Police his name and a motive for wanting the 3 men dead early on in the investigation, but TMI says Clark was never even interviewed. Jasper gave defence evidence at Worms and Steele's trial that he was the real getaway driver for a different lone gunman who is still alive and was never also interviewed. He was prevented by the judge from giving any names or any background about the armed robbery, apart from that of Jesse Gale, who he said supplied a backup Browning pistol for the hit, because he died in a car crash before the trial. Jasper told the police he drove a lone killer to the scene before Darren Nichols gave his version. Mr. Jasper had to refer in court to the alleged assassin he drove to as Mr. D. Jasper was arrested on suspicion of a separate robbery on January the 14th, 1996, just over a month after the murders. He handwrote a statement in his cell saying he was paid £5,000 to drive Mr. D, who he named, to the murder scene on the night the 3 were killed. Jasper asked to speak to detectives investigating the murders and said he wanted protection as he feared he would be killed for knowing too much. His account said the murders stemmed from money owed after a security van armed robbery. The robbery was identified as a Group 4 armed robbery in Dagenham, East London on October the 4th, 1989, which he said was masterminded by Patsy Clark, who did not take part in the actual robbery. A group of 4 robbers, led by an associate of Tucker, netted more than £400,000 after taking the van to a car park in Hanuat Forest. Mr McKelvey said police intelligence said 2 of the robbers went to Spain, leaving associate Tony Tucker to launder the money through the door security contract he had at various nightclubs in Romford. On their return to the UK, the 4 were charged and later convicted of the robbery at Chelmsford Crown Court in April 1991, each getting 15 years each. But they later got released on appeal in 1994 and wanted their money back. Mr Jasper told the police that Clark was owed £300,000 and arranged the murders for an East End crime family who supplied the pump-action shotgun and a Fiat Uno on false plates, and got Mr D in as the assassin, and a backup gun for the job was provided by Gale. Mr McKelvey said, "The intelligence is that Tucker started spending the money, but when they got out he was unable to pay it back. So Clark allegedly arranged the murders. Tucker, Tate and Rolfe were lured to the scene to supply 4 kilograms of cocaine." Further investigation linked the armed robbers to Mr D through the ownership of a bar, and Tucker to the armed robberies through door security work. Tucker was interviewed about the robbery after it happened, but never arrested. Associates of Clark were named as people of interest in intelligence during the murder inquiry, Mr McKelvey said. He added, "Another associate of Clark's, thought to be involved in money laundering, was one of the last people to be phoned by Tate at 6:26 for 17 seconds on the day they were shot. But despite the significance of the phone call, he was also never interviewed." Jasper's account, which said the murders were later at around midnight, was initially investigated, and he took detectives to a location away from the access to the farm track where the bodies were found. He said Mr D had walked across a field, which was later found to be less than a mile from the crime scene, before returning to the getaway car. But senior detectives chose not to investigate further after saying Jasper's account was not in line with the strategic direction of the investigation. Mr Patrick said Jasper's account has never been professionally examined. All this should have been bottomed out. Those names should have been asked where they were on the night, who they were with, and phone records looked at, but we couldn't see any of this was done. Womes and Steele, who remains a Category A prisoner, have failed a number of appeal bids. Their latest application was made to the Criminal Cases Review Commission in May 2018, but there is yet to be an outcome. An Essex police spokeswoman said, "There is an exhaustive police investigation, and following the trial and convictions, the evidence has been further examined by the Criminal Cases Review Commission and the Court of Appeal. This case is currently under review with the CCRC, and it would be inappropriate to comment further whilst their review is ongoing. We, of course, always fully cooperate with the CCRC and would take direction from them about any investigation action required. Any new evidence identified should be routed through the CCRC for their consideration."